Well, last week we began talking and looking at the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' initial sermon in the Gospel of Matthew, and we continue that today. I had you imagine thinking about the upside-down nature of God's kingdom in that passage. I had you imagine upside-down pineapple, upside-down cake, as a way to think about this upside-down wisdom of God and how yet all will be revealed someday, and that there's sweetness through and through that cake. I also heard there was some disappointment that I did not provide pineapple upside-down cake after the service. Well, this week, there isn't any either. But we're still going to explore this upside-down wisdom from the world's wisdom sometimes. We're still making the cake, I guess you might say. We're still in this work, waiting for this full revelation as we participate in turning things right side up. So this sermon today, it's the chapter 6, some highlights from chapter 6. It's giving some direction on right side up living, I'm going to call it. Choices about all the actions that we make in our lives. What do they reveal about us? What do they reveal about God? You'll recall that this sermon is for a few followers. He's called about 4 of them so far, and the crowds that had been gathering, and maybe those that have started to following him up on the mountain. He talks here about these essential Jewish practices that all of those folks would have known, about giving alms to the poor, about prayer, and about fasting. And instead of seeking attention when doing these things, when giving or being seen in prideful ways to attract attention, Jesus is really cautioning all who gather around him about these appearances, maybe for the sake of personal fame. But instead, he gives this instruction to give in secret, to pray in secret, to guard your appearance as you engage in faithful spiritual practices. It's hypocritical if these actions are all about you instead of about God, Jesus says. See, the Pharisees paid a lot of attention to the outward appearance, what others saw of them on the outside, but they weren't as perhaps much concerned about what was in their hearts, being hypocritical as a leader, as they would have been. We can see it all around. It's the stuff that movies are even made of. I was reading the Gazette this past week. One of the new movies is called, it's a satire, a documentary. It's called Honk for Jesus and Save Your Soul. I've not seen the movie, not endorsing it at all, but it's this idea of how leaders can preach one thing and do another, far from the message of Jesus. And yet this message is for leaders, but it's for all of us. We all can certainly become hypocrites in some way when we take our religion that's supposed to be built on Jesus' love and forgiveness, when we take that and we turn it into something else, perhaps a hate or for someone else, even someone who may be looking at things in a different way that we do. When our actions contradict what we profess as the central core of our faith, or when we make it about us. Check our motivations, all of us, in the spiritual practices that we do, and also just in all the ways that we live our life. I think that's what Jesus is talking about. I started thinking about social media and the appearances that we all have on social media. Is it for good? Is it for bad? Well, could be both, could be bad, could be both things. It's good, it's a place to share empathy, to share news stories, to share expressions of care and concern. And we even share spiritual practices from time to time in social media and discipleship opportunities. It's so much good there. And yet when the goal of a social media is to see how many likes you can get or how many followers, it begins to go off balance there, how tempting that is. For teens, I've read social media, it's just an enormous pressure there to keep up their appearances on social media. It certainly can lead to anxiety and depression. And I don't think that's limited to teens. It is interesting, though, that 75% of children, if we ask what they want to be when they grow up, there's something that didn't even exist when I was growing up. They want to be, any guesses? An influencer, a YouTuber. Yeah, including one of my 6-year-old grandchildren. That's the answer. And as far as why, well, there is an opportunity there for creativity, a desire to be famous, for self-expression, for money, for people, and for recognition. Top 6 reasons. It's a place that we want to think about. And Jesus is saying, seek to live as authentic of a life as you can. And if you're a Jesus follower, you're wanting that life to be right side up. You're wanting it to be pointing to God through it all. Being authentic, revealing the challenges of life, the good stuff of life. Authenticity is a challenge. Our roundtable was saying, well, how do you do that? How do you live an authentic life? We had a great conversation. I'll share what they came up with here in a minute. But I also want to share just something that I came across in a retreat that I was on Friday about authenticity. This is not from a spiritual source, but listen to this and think about this for yourself and receive this as a gift. It says, authenticity is rarely found in grand gestures, not in lightning strikes or fireworks in the sky. It is a deep-rooted, gentle stirring, an invitation to be the only you there was ever meant to be. It's the clearing away of all that is not true, peeling back the layers until you discover what was there in the beginning. It's allowing yourself to be fully known and loved, as well as really knowing and loving someone else. It's the willingness to stand alone in doing what you believe is right, even when what's right isn't a popular choice. Authenticity can't be copied. It can't be false. It withstands shifting sand. It resists comparison. It defies seeing yourself as who you are less than or who you're not. It's acknowledging the difference between what is fake and what is real, because when we are real, shabbiness won't matter. Lack will disappear. Falling short will lose its foothold. So your time is now to welcome in the light that is all your own, and to dive deep into the glorious reality of who you are meant to be. Let's not tarry, let's not hesitate in finding the one life you were born to claim. Isn't that beautiful? Receive it as a gift. The roundtable, in thinking about authentic life, a conversation came back to, well, we really need community to help us do that. Community that will allow us to speak truth and love with one another. You know, John Wesley, the guy that began this tradition that we are all a part of, had groups get together for just that purpose. And he said, we're going to watch over one another in love. And we're going to ask a question like, how goes it with your soul? A place to be real, a place to be authentic with your struggles, with your celebrations, and all of that together. John Wesley was not perfect, but he certainly was an inspiration, and he certainly had wisdom about the power of a small community. I was actually asked to be in a small group like that just this week, out of the blue. I thought, how interesting. So I'm going to ask the same to any of you, that if any of you are wanting to be in a small group that helps us live an authentic life, let me know, or let Pastor Jonathan know, or let Becca know. We can talk about that. Because time to grow is certainly a treasure. And speaking of treasure, What about that part of the passage that we read today that talks specifically about treasure and that the men sang about treasure? And don't collect those things that are going to get moth-eaten or rusty, and yet find other things that might be a treasure. The Message, the paraphrase version of this gospel says it like this. It says, "It's obvious, isn't it? It's the place where your treasure is the place you will most want to be and end up being." That's another better for worse situation, isn't it? The treasures. Is it something about sitting with a bunch of rusty, moth-eaten things, or something of God is the question. And when my son Justin died, one of the gifts that someone from this community gave was a garden gift. It's out in our garden. And it's become a quote that I've thought about many times. And it says, when someone you love becomes a memory, the memory becomes a treasure. It's true, isn't it? Because the memory is love, isn't it? That's the treasure. And I certainly have grown in ways of understanding love in this day and eternally. Yeah. So what is it that you treasure? That question that Jesus asked. Jesus is certainly asking and hoping that you're pursuing something that is not in wealth, not in position, not in status, not in a public appearance of some sort, but in faithfulness. And that grows in spiritual practices that we commit our lives to for the sake of love. That's what we treasure. All through the amazing grace of God. So hear this good news today, that Jesus talks about that reward in seeking to be authentic, humble, steadfast, and treasuring the things of eternal worth. And a community like this one is so important to continue to remind us of what that treasure looks like, how the actions of our lives encourage us in that treasure. You know, from time to time, some faithful folks do get a little accolade. They do get a little recognition. They do get a little bit of fame. And that actually happened this past week, too. There's a woman that Jerry Oakland pointed out to me as he works with the foundation and the connection with the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation. There was a woman named Minnie Rupak who worked on a housekeeping staff for a company, and upon her passing, left her estate to what was then called the Community Welfare Fund, later became the Greater Cedar Rapids Community Foundation. And they said that her work throughout that time made a lasting, albeit quiet, impact on the community as a whole. And so in honoring her legacy, there are recognitions and honorees for people that serve in a staff role in a non-profit organization that are making a difference, encouraging, going on and going above and beyond their work. We need leaders like this, don't we? We do. Folks connected with our very own congregation. We celebrate Magisha Gloria, who works for supporting recent immigrants and refugees. And we honor Clint Tweetball for his work in building strong neighborhoods in the Cedar Rapids community. And we honor Dave Mather, who is here with us, working behind the scenes for financial support and facility support of the ministries here of Christ through St. Paul's. The righteousness that Jesus calls for is this sincere and harmonious when it is between our hearts and our actions of our life. And these are encouraging examples of right side up living, I would say. Today, we also want to share with you some of your heart. Many of you have participated in listening sessions this summer. Pastor Jonathan led a team in some training in how to really listen for your hearts. And how do our hearts and our actions line up? How are they harmonious? And how is their authenticity there? And these themes seem to have risen up from many of you. I've placed little pieces of paper by this door and by that door, so that when you leave, you're welcome to pick one up so you can have it and pray about it. But these are the essence of what we've heard from your hearts. To grow through vibrant ministries with children, youth, and families, creating a culture of belonging for our youngest disciples. Second, resist injustice by doing justice. Show God's love in the public square by pursuing systemic change. Third, open ourselves to be a place of ever-increasing inclusion and belonging. Continue to develop what's reflected in our welcome statement. And fourth, work to develop deeper relationships. I'm going to say authentic relationships, both inward and outward, that we're fostering places and times for meaningful connections. How do those sound? They sound like your heart. I ask you, as our church council will be considering these as actual missional priorities for 2023, that you might be inspired in your own prayer life to pray with Jesus about these. You can join me here on Monday, tomorrow at noon. Every Monday, we're going to be here for 15 minutes for prayer as well. And it's a place like this where we can gather and have prayers, authentic prayers, rise in the goodness of our loving God. Friends, may our motivations of our hearts and our actions be aligned. May they be in step with Jesus, the one who seeks to turn all things right side up. Amen.